I really enjoyed this discussion on Twitter about whether we should have two categories for the Game of the Year. Shroud mentioned that, and he's actually opened a big discussion whether we should have one for single-player games and the other one for multiplayer games. Now, when I first thought about it, I thought, all right, listen, a Game of the Year should be one, a game that just rise above any category above all, and one is selected to be the best. Now, unlike some other categories, like for example best action adventure game, best role playing game, best fighting game, best family game, sports game, and so on, multiplayer is kind of more wider cut, which underneath it of course includes all the other categories, some of them that I mentioned here. I mean, not some of them, all of them. The thing is that because these can be subcategories of another more broader cut, which is called multiplayer. Now, of course, there are single-player games, and those combine both single-player and multiplayer, and those are more limited in their multiplayer features, like Elden Ring, for example, feature that, but it's not really the main thing in the game. Usually, when I mention, well, multiplayer games, and I think others do that, I usually mean games that are dedicated multiplayer games, they're designed from the ground up to be multiplayer games. And if you look back in those who actually won Game of the Year, well, most of them were actually single-player games. This is true. So in my opinion, it is harder for a multiplayer game to win the category. Now, It Takes Two won, which was a co-op multiplayer-only game, but I think one that really stood out was Overwatch. It really stood out. It was such an amazing and unique game that really stood out in terms of its excellence in so many aspects that it really deserved it. Because it did something special. I mean, it's not like it was totally unique, and it's not the first of its genre, of course, but the polish, the unique, the story, the animations that come with everything as a container of everything that included as part of the game launch, and of course what came after, really made it stood out from the rest. And honestly, if there was such a great multiplayer game, I think it had a great chance of winning. Because I think it doesn't matter if it's a single-player or multiplayer game, if the game does really something special that resonates with many players, I don't see, of course, a reason why it won't win. Overwatch is a great example of that. Now, I saw kind of a snippet of video where Shroud mentioned Marvel Rivals, for example. But he also mentioned the amount of players. I don't think it's related to the amount of players, to be honest. I mean, this is not the only thing. This is probably one aspect of it. Because there are so many things that should be considered, like the creative field, like the narrative storytelling were applicable, of course, art direction, music and audio, things related to the technical aspect of the game, quality, polish, innovation, fun factor, core mechanics, control, game loops. But I think one thing that should be very, very important is the giving innovation more score compared to other things, where how the game advances the medium or introduces groundbreaking new ideas. I think this is, for example, why Expedition 33 should be one of the highest candidates to win this year. And I think this is one of the reasons why It Takes Two was also something so special. Elden Ring was also something like that, brought the Souls-like genre into an open world and created like one of the best open world game designs ever made, if not the best. Baldur's Gate 3, which is kind of felt like a revival of a turn-based genre. The polish, the story, everything around it was just so perfected. Now the thing is that with single player games, they can contain many things that just multiplayer just don't focus at. Many multiplayer games are focused on a very tight gameplay loop that doesn't really give emphasis on so many other aspects that single player games have. So of course, multiplayer games, when they are evaluated, of course, should give higher points to what they do offer, not what they don't have. Now, another thing that I actually checked, and I asked AI because again, I couldn't really calculate it myself. I asked about, based on 2024 release data for games on Steam, the answer that I got: single player, 77% of all games released on Steam in 2024 use the single player tag, and 11% of games released in 2024 use the multiplayer tag. So in general, there are more, well, based on that data, more games that are released as single players than multiplayer. So this also increases the chance that there's going to be a single player game that will win rather than a multiplayer. But we can't ignore the fact that there is a multiplayer category in the Game Awards. This is basically the multiplayer game of the year. And if there is an amazing multiplayer game, it can win the multiplayer game of the year. It exists. The reason Game of the Year is such a prestige award because only a single game can rise above all others. It doesn't matter which genre, which category, which whatever. If it's an indie or triple, it doesn't matter, nothing matters. All it matters is just a game that really stood out from everything else. And it should be a single one. And if there is a game which is a multiplayer that can rise above that, it can actually win also both the categories, both the multiplayer Game of the Year and also Game of the Year. It also becomes much more prestigious if you just a single one, you won the first place. Now I know there are going to be players that prefer of course one over the other, those who love single player games, those who love multiplayer games, and they want to feel like, you know, their favorite multiplayer game or single player game won. Because it's indeed a very broad category. And from their perspective, or for basically those who prefer that approach, it's ensured that both types of groundbreaking games are honored each year. But against it, come on, the best is the best, a single award that finds the best overall experience, period. I don't care what you are, you want to get this reward, you need to be the best of the best. It also, in my opinion, encourages more ambition from players, from developers. They need to push hard and excel in all areas that are, well, of course, relevant to their game, including even hybrid games. So by reducing it, of course, just making one, it also avoids the, you know, trophy for everyone. You know, a system that basically dilutes the award's value. It's like two can actually win first place. Come on. I mean, I'm pretty sure when also the judges decide of that, they also take into consideration the influence on culture and the industry in general. There should be a situation that's going to be like, you know, or I said in another way, there should only be one clear, undisputed winner for Game of the Year, not two. Then people will ask, well, which one of those is actually better? It always be the discussion, right? If whether going to be two. So this one is better than the other. Come on, there should be one that rises above all. There's also a message like, you know, greatness in games is universal. It doesn't matter which game it is. If you're able to win this game, you stood above all others. Now, it can also create a situation where it can be a problem, where a game is actually both. Okay, Elden Ring is not just, of course, it's mainly single player game, but it's also multiplayer games, especially with the modes that introduced after. Same goes to Baldur's Gate 3. So that's why you need one award that fits all. You can't have two. Maybe there's a game that is just both of them. So which category you're going to put this game in? You're going to do injustice for this category and maybe another injustice to the other category if the game is really good and stand up or maybe that game can win both categories as a single player or multiplayer game. It become confusing. What you're going to do next? You're going to create another category for a game that is both single player and multiplayer? Come on. We don't want Games of the Year award. We want Game of the Year, not Games of the Year. So as you can see, there are different reasons why this just shouldn't exist at all. If there is a game, multiplayer or single player, that can rise up and be something really, whatever, again, all the parameters that are taken into account, it has a chance to win. And to be honest with you, it doesn't happen very frequently that we see a multiplayer game that really stood out from so many other games. You know, in single player games, it does happen more frequently because, again, because there's more innovation there that can be expressed creatively. That it feels less of rehash compared to another game because there's so many aspects of the game that can just lead to something that feels unique and new. Expedition 33 is a great example of that, inspired by many other games, but when you play it, it feels fresh, it feels like another experience. So maybe, you know, multiplayer games just not, well, innovating enough. Because it's a multiplayer game, they need to create a stable base of constant players playing the game. Maybe they just don't taking many risks. It's not that they can't excel in what they do, but Overwatch is a very good example of that. But Overwatch went even beyond just the multiplayer game, everything. You just felt like you are diving into a story, another world. It was so different, the way it actually presented itself. And also the multiplayer, when it comes to all these, you know, the main genre is very, very saturated, very competitive. Whether with single players game, there are so many different options, so it's easier, of course, for them to stand up from the rest. But because of that lack of whatever innovation and risk-taking, they should get a category of their own? I don't think so. I would say just do better. Overwatch, It Takes Two are great example of that. Now, of course, this is debatable, and things I mentioned here, some thoughts about that. I want to hear your opinion about that. This is just, again, my thoughts about the subject, and I still believe it after reading many other opinions as well. So yeah, let's discuss it there in the comment section below. I want to kind of hear more of your thoughts, again, in favor and against this. Thanks for watching.